what's really worrying, it has little or nothing to do with the tragedy in Southport any longer. What it's shown is there is this kind of underclass, a group of dissatisfied, angry, anti-establishment people who feel that nobody bothers about them, they're left behind, they don't belong to they don't belong to anybody or anything, or who are enjoying and responding to people inviting them to come out for a good punch-up and a bit of looting.
Our top story, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer will hold an emergency Cobra meeting this evening as police forces brace themselves for more trouble on the streets of the UK's towns and cities. 30 rallies are expected to happen tomorrow. So far, there have been nearly 400 arrests since violence was triggered following misinformation about the fatal stabbings of 3 young girls in Southport. All of this leaves questions, perhaps unanswered to an extent, about how the justice system will cope. 400 people already, a justice system in crisis. How will this situation evolve? How can it be calmed? Are the actions of the Prime Minister working? Let's speak to Ken Clarke, who was Conservative Justice Secretary during the 2011 London riots. Ken, good evening. Welcome to the programme.
Good evening.
Very good to speak to you. First of all, then, I want to ask about Cobra meetings. There was criticism of the Prime Minister for it taking several days before a Cobra meeting was initiated. Now we're having our second one in the space of, 2 or 3 days. How important are these meetings for organising a response?
Well, it's a good idea to have one, but they sometimes don't actually decide anything very important, because you just find out everything's going as smoothly as it can do in these terrible circumstances. So it's a good way of checking up that nobody's having a particular problem, or there's 2 particular bits of the system that aren't actually working together. But I suspect it's partly just to reassure the public that the government is gripped with the idea of a national crisis, which is indeed what it is, and that we're not failing to get everywhere together just to make sure that everybody thinks they're doing the best they possibly can and don't need any further support from any other bit of government. So. I don't know. You never do know what actually goes on there. I've been to quite a lot of Cobra meetings over the years. Sometimes there's practically nothing happens there. Sometimes they're possibly gripping, and you do need everybody to get together and start taking some decisions that pull everything together.
A new YouGov survey this afternoon shows that nearly half of voters think Sir Keir Starmer is handling the riots badly. 49% think that, whereas only 31% believe he's handling them well. Where would you place yourself? How is Sir Keir Starmer doing?
I think that's a particularly useless opinion poll, unless you ask people, well, what do you think the Prime Minister should be doing about all this? I don't think he can be accused of being the cause of it. And the Prime Minister's office can't possibly start second-guessing the police and the criminal justice system all over the country. But he's trying to make reassuring public statements, which are fairly platitudinous, because they give us the same opinion as over 90% of the public have. This is all mindless thuggery. And he is having things like the Cobra meetings to make sure that his government is doing everything it possibly can to deal with it. So I'd like to ask any sensible members of the 49%, what exactly do you think the Prime Minister should do further to stop people rioting in Rotherham or wherever it happens to be?
And what do you think? How do you think he is doing? What's your assessment?
I think he's just presiding in presumably as angry and as baffled a way as anybody else would be. I think he obviously shares and voices the sentiments that we all have, but my main reaction, this is all mindless thuggery, but it's a bit of a platitude. That's obvious, that's what it is. It has little or nothing and what's really worrying, it has little or nothing to do with the tragedy in Southport any longer. What it's shown is there is this kind of underclass, a group of dissatisfied, angry, anti-establishment people who feel that nobody bothers about them, they're left behind, they don't belong to they don't belong to anybody or anything, or who are enjoying and responding to people inviting them to come out for a good punch-up and a bit of looting. And a society where so many people, it is true of our society at the moment, a lot of people feel switched off, anti-establishment, forgotten about, nobody takes any notice, certainly cynical about all politicians, hating government, and hating the police. And they tend to focus on being very anti-immigrant and very racist. And so once a habit breaks out across the country of a bit of rioting aimed at immigrants, unfortunately, a lot of rather beer-bellied, middle-aged men turn out, and a few others, and a lot of hangers-on who are just hanging around in order to see what's going on, making a thoroughgoing nuisance of themselves, to say the least. In fact, doing a great deal of damage and injuring perfectly honest, decent policemen.
Yeah. After the 2011 riots, the Home Affairs Select Committee noted that what ultimately worked in quelling that disorder was increasing the number of police officers on duty and, quote, flooding the streets with police. We're in a situation today where we can't do that, aren't we? The police numbers have only just returned to something resembling normal.
You get in from neighbouring people. These, from what I can see on the television and from the reporting, the riots on this occasion are not enormous numbers of people. It's a few hundred. And you've got to kettle them, you've got to have the lines, you've got to contain them. And you mustn't, it's no good just charging in and beating them with sticks and things and trying to arrest them all, because you'll turn the whole thing into a disorganized riot. The police remain calm, disciplined, and do what is necessary to separate two different groups of demonstrators, or to protect property, or to protect immigrants or whoever's being attacked. And I think they can cope with it. Every time you have major disorder of this kind, I'm sure the police themselves are a little bit more about what the best tactics are and how to use the number of men you've got. But there were occasions on the first few days when outnumbered police had to retreat. But as far as I'm aware, the problems that are still continuing are pretty suitably kettled by the lines of policemen with shields, aren't they?
Well, it seems to be that there is relatively decent containment, but then the containment obviously results in shop windows being smashed and police officers being injured in the process. I want to ask you about some comments from the Director of Public Prosecutions for England and Wales, saying he is willing to consider charging some rioters with terrorism offences. Do you think that is appropriate? Rather odd definition. I'm not sure that would make a great practical difference, but I defer to the prosecutor. It's entirely up to him to decide and satisfy a court that the evidence justifies such a charge. I mean, it makes it sound as though these people are being described as though they're somehow politically motivated. I'm not sure there is much politics in it, apart from the sheer nihilism, hatred of the way the world's treating them, and hatred of the establishment, and the police are a symbol of authority. And what they're doing is not suicide bombs and gunning down political targets. It just is rather mindless violence. But it's all semantics. I don't see that it makes a great deal of difference. Yeah. You blamed the riots that swept across England in 2011 on a broken penal system that had failed to rehabilitate hardcore offenders that you at the time described as criminal classes. Is that similar to what we are seeing today?
Oh, that's the worst problem today. I agree. That's why I welcomed the appointment of now Lord Timpson, who worked for me all those years ago, first when I was Home Secretary and then when I was Justice Secretary, trying to get rehabilitation. Of course, you punish criminals. That's important. Although just adding years onto their sentence just makes the prisons more overcrowded slums and tougher places for the guys to live in, which toughens some of them up. The other duty you have towards the public is to try to make sure as many of the criminals as possible don't commit more criminal offences when they're released. Hence, you should try to rehabilitate them. But sentences are far longer now than they were in my day. The prisons are now mostly overcrowded slums. Wandsworth was always a difficult place, but with the latest report on Wandsworth shows how you're not rehabilitating people, you're just housing them in subhuman conditions where they have drugs and they meet a lot of tougher friends than they had before they got in. And about half of them are back in trouble with the law within a year of getting out. And we need to concentrate on the good work that's done in a few places, in which we were doing more and more of when I was Home Secretary in the 90s, of trying to rehabilitate people so that once they've tasted prison, they go out with the prospect of getting a decent job and getting somewhere to live, well, preferably a girlfriend as well, but that's a matter for them. And so there's a chance that there'll be no future victims of more crimes from these guys going out. At the moment, about half the people who are released are back in trouble and back inside again within 12 months, which means more crime, more victims until they're caught.
Part of the solution is for these rioters to get girlfriends, you say?
Well, that's me being slightly tongue-in-cheek. The chances of the younger ones that haven't got too bad a record going straight come when, I think, I was going to say, they need a job, a flat, and a girlfriend, and then there's a sporting chance that they'll decide that they're giving up their previous stupid way of life, and they'll go straight. There's quite a high proportion of the male population have criminal records buried in their past, when they were juvenile delinquents of some kind, and have completely turned themselves around and grown up and got themselves settled down, and you never dreamed they'd been in trouble.
Just one other comment from 2011, Mr. Clarke. I'm very grateful for your time as well. It's so good to get your insight on all of this.
You're looking up and reminding me of 2011 now.
Well, what was it like at the time, I suppose?
I don't have the clearest and detailed memory of it.
That's all right. But one thought I had was you referred to Sir Keir Starmer perhaps being as baffled as everyone else. Did you feel baffled in 2011?
No, I felt worried that under the surface there was a minority, obviously it's a small minority of our population, who are so switched off from any sense of society or community. That's what we've got to address. I mean, the country's got to get back on its feet again. The recent election just showed that most of the public were quite switched off, disliked all their politicians, wanted to throw the ones who were in office out. A lot of ordinary people with ordinary jobs feel they're less well off, quite rightly, than they were a few years ago. Nobody's bothering about them. It's too easy for them to start blaming it on immigrants and people, ethnic minorities, and trying to find scapegoats and targets. And in the case of these hooligans on the streets, just deciding, I'm going to show how angry and how upset I am and how I couldn't care less about anything except whether I might be able to get anything out if we smash the window of the supermarket. Those ills, a minor version of those ills, run through too much of our society, and the new government has a fantastic task on hand. It's going to have to do tough, difficult, unpopular things for some years, ignore the opinion polls, get the country back on its feet, and restore the sense of belonging and obligation amongst the great overwhelming mass of the population that we used to have. It's very difficult. It's what Margaret Thatcher had to do in 1979, and we succeeded, and we weren't at all popular when we did it. None of our policies were popular. If Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves can keep the Labour Party under control, which is quite a big if, they're going to have to settle doing that. And they mustn't just respond to the media and the opinion polls.
Let's speak now to Dr. Victor Olisa, former senior police officer who served in the Met Police and took over as Haringey's borough commander after the disturbances of 2011. Victor, good evening to you.
Good evening, Callum.
So then, I suppose some reaction on what Ken Clarke was just telling us. Mindless thuggery. He referred to an underclass. He sort of bowed to the Director of Public Prosecution's own expertise on whether there are terrorism charges to be brought in all of this. What's your take?
I think, the rioters, whether they're today, whether 2011, they have a grievance. 2011 is probably down to unfair policing, predominantly, probably society not giving people what they want. Today, it's been driven by immigration, being driven by the fact that people from a different country are coming over here and taking the privileges, the wealth, the jobs, the housing, or whatever else it is. So there's a real cause driving the rioting today as it was in 2011. However, the level of violence against the police is unprecedented. Attacking police, deliberately going out and attacking police officers. So in 2011, police were caught in some of the violence and some of the criminality that took place, but I didn't sense that people were going out to attack the police. So this is very different. The way of acting is very different. That for me is really worrying in the sense of, someone might explain that they're attacking what's part of the institution. But in this situation, the police are doing everything that they can do. They've arrested the suspect. They're trying to protect the community. They're working with other public sector organisations to provide support for the community where these 3 young girls were tragically murdered. So why should a group of people come out and attack the police, and then you hear in some of the news item, when a female police officer has been injured, that she deserves it? That's totally unacceptable. So some of the descriptions that have been used against the people committing the riots are actually thuggery. In my view, I think there should be a sequential response to this, and some of it layered. But the first and most important thing that should happen is that the police should be properly equipped with the resources. They've got the law, they've got the experience, and actually deal with the people who are causing the most violence forcefully, proportionately, get them off the street. And if there's spaces in prison to put them in prison, put them in prison. If there isn't spaces to put them in prison, find some form of incarceration. Regain control, get these people off the streets. And for those people who probably just go for the sake of excitement, for whatever else, they will soon drift away. But the hardcore needs to be dealt with, and we need to regain control. And then we can get to the more taxing, more challenging, more complex discussion that we need to have about what is it that's actually wrong with society that's driving the people to actually get on the streets and riot.
Yeah. In terms of the sort of lessons from 2011, Victor, some of which you've touched upon already, I suppose, but there's an element here I think that you're getting at there where there is a level of engagement required with the people who have taken to the streets in the last week. I wonder how you time that. I guess you don't do that while they're throwing bricks at the heads of police officers, for example. But at what point is engagement essential to try to address whatever beliefs and concerns have led to this?
I think it's really difficult on this occasion. So one of the significant difference with this is the people who are described as influencers, who are actually exacerbating what might be a false information, what might be an erroneous communication. Those people don't seem to me to be accessible to the police to engage in that negotiation. Going back to 2011, there were people, whether it's within cities, whether it's within certain communities, that the police can have some traction and start to have a conversation and a dialogue with. That's not here at the moment. Yeah. So that option is not available to the police at the moment. Maybe, I'll go back and repeat my point. They get to a position when they're removing some of the more violent rioters off the street, then maybe they can actually start to influence the group of people who might engage in the rioting and actually influence them, show them, give an example that it's not worth their while to get on the streets because the consequences are going to be dire for them and for whichever group they might be part of.